Welcome to the 0.5% Podcast. My name is Nick Plosser, and I would like to thank everybody for joining, listening in. I want to encourage everybody to please subscribe to this podcast at any podcast directory you listen to, Apple iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, all of the above, many more. Also have a YouTube channel if you prefer to listen that way. That's at the 0.5% Podcast as well. We are also available on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. If you are an active duty vet, reserve, or anybody you know is, and you think would be a good guest, please reach out. Would really like to talk to you and have you on for a show. So that leads us into today's guest, Scott DeLuzio. Scott was a member of the Connecticut National Guard, and like many, joined after 9/11, and along with his younger brother Stephen, and later on was deployed to Afghanistan. Where unfortunately his brother Stephen was killed in action, and so I really appreciated Scott coming on and being willing to share his story. And he's gone on to start his own podcast as well, called the Drive On Podcast, and we discussed that as well. So without further ado, let's get into the show.
Okay, Mr. Push-Ups, let's hear your story. It's not just the uniform. It's the stories that you tell. So much fun and imagination.
From now on, you will speak only when spoken to. And the first and last words out of your filthy sewers will be sir. Do you maggots understand that?
Okay, welcome back to the 0.5% Podcast. My name is Nick Plosser. Thanks for joining. Guest today is Scott DeLuzio. Scott, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, well, we'll just go ahead and get right in this. I'm going to try my best to stay out of your way. Scott, just so everybody knows, Scott is a fellow podcaster. He has his own podcast called the Drive On Podcast. We'll revisit that as the show goes. But so Scott's a pro, and he'll take it away. But Scott, just can you give a quick background, kind of where you're from, and kind of what led you to choose a career in the service, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, my name is Scott DeLuzio. I do have a podcast, Drive On Podcast, which focuses on military issues that people might be having, and kind of sharing stories and stuff like that. But as far as my military career, I got into the military largely due to what happened on 9/11, which I think is probably a common story for a lot of people. But when 9/11 happened, I was actually in college. I was a sophomore in college, and I knew at that point, once when they were saying that it was a terrorist attack, and there's talks of going to war and all that kind of stuff, I knew there was going to be some sort of military response, and it was probably going to take a while to go after whoever did this. And so I decided, I was partway through college. I figured, this is going to be a long, probably military engagement or response, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to stay and finish college. I'm not going to drop out and join the Army and go busting heads and stuff like that early on. So I figured if there's going to be a war, it's probably going to still be going on after I graduated college. So so after I graduated, the fire in me to drop out and go fight in this war kind of died down a little bit. It was still there, but it was tampered down a bit. And so I started my first professional job out of college. I kind of put the military on the back burner for a while because I was distracted with this new job. But then right around that time, shortly thereafter, my younger brother joined the Vermont Army National Guard just a few months after I started working this first job out of college, which kind of like poured gasoline on the fire that kind of was dampened out.
Hey, let me stop you real quick. Before we go, where are you from originally? Like, what area of the country are you from?
Yep, sure. So originally I'm from Connecticut,
Okay.
And that's where I joined the military.
Okay.
In Connecticut. I went to college in Rhode Island, so up in New England, everything is pretty close. So it's it was a half hour, 45-minute drive from my house, to the college in Rhode Island.
Gotcha.
But right now I'm living out in Arizona, so I don't live up in the Northeast anymore.
And what's the and is it true? Name of your town is Surprise. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's the name of it. There's no punchline or anything, like it's not a joke. It's
not
actually
Surprise! Exclamation point.
No, exactly. Although that might be a good come to the city kind of campaign or whatever.
Right.
But we have spring training when people can actually play baseball.
Yeah, right.
Out here, and we have the Rangers and the Royals in our town, and it's cool to go check out the baseball games and stuff like that. So
awesome. Well, anyway, sorry I interrupted. Keep going. So you were your brother had joined the Vermont Guard, and then from there.
Yeah. So my brother joined the Vermont National Guard, like he said, and that really added fuel to the fire for me, wanting to join the military. It really got me more interested in it, and I learned a lot more about what actually was involved, not like the Hollywood stuff that people tend to think of in the military, but like what the actual requirements were and things like that. So I got to talk to him about that and figure all that stuff out. And shortly after he graduated basic training, we all, my parents and me and, his girlfriend at the time and everything, we went down there for his basic training at Fort Benning. That really kind of added to that fire for me. And seeing all the soldiers walking around and, it really made me want to join.
Yep.
And then, but shortly after he got back, I heard a news report about how the Army recruiting numbers were so far down. They were not going to hit any of their goals or anything like that. And that totally pissed me off.
Yeah.
It just got me so angry. Like what the hell? We just like a few years ago, we got planes dropping out of the sky, and now we can't even get people to sign up to go and fight in this war to kind of protect our country.
Right.
But then I kind of stopped and I looked at inwards towards myself, and I was like, well, I'm not exactly helping this situation either by not doing anything here, by not joining the Army or any branch of the service. So I went to at the time, like I said, I lived in Connecticut, so I went to a Connecticut National Guard recruiter, and joined up there. My brother was enlisted, and I had nothing but respect, and I was very proud of his service and everything that he was doing. And I never really wanted to outrank him. And so while I had a college degree, I could have gone to officer candidate school.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just one of those things where I never wanted to outrank him. I felt like if anything, he could outrank me, and I wouldn't care. But I never really wanted to outrank him. I didn't want to take away from any of what he did. And I felt like he led me into the military, and so I never really wanted to be higher ranking than him. Anyway, so that's why I enlisted.
That's why you did the enlisted route. Okay, and then your family. How did your family? Your brother's going in, you're going in. Obviously, did you grow up in a family of people who also were in the service, or was you and your brother the first? And how did your parents feel about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my grandfather was on my mother's side on my father's side was in the Navy in World War II, and my grandfather on my mother's side, he lived in Poland during World War II, and he was actually captured. From what I understand, the story is he got captured by the Nazis, and he was forced to be a cook for some higher-ranking military official, general or something like that. While he was in Poland. So that was basically the extent of the military service. My parents did not serve in the military. They missed Vietnam by about a year or so. The war ended, and then they turned 18 the next year. Okay. So they just barely missed Vietnam, and so they never really served. Although growing up, we were always brought up to have nothing but respect for the military.
Okay.
They were our superheroes. Like some people are into, Superman and Batman and, all these other bigger than life type people. We would turn on the news and we'd see these soldiers, and it would be like awe-inspiring. We even went to an Air Force base after Desert Storm to come and greet some of the soldiers coming back, and it was like the greatest thing for us. It was really cool. So,
yeah. So the patriotism thing, even though your parents didn't serve, that was still strong in your family in terms of
huge.
So when you and your brother decided it, you had support of your family. I'm always curious to see what people's family is, how they think about that, and through the generations, obviously it changes. In Vietnam era, maybe it was different. So I was just curious about that. Okay.
Yeah. And my mom, just to be clear, my mom was a wreck when we told her that we were going to serve. Like, being patriotic is one thing, but then also sending your kids overseas to, inevitably go fight in a war, was kind of hard. It was hard for her.
When I told my mom, I looked at those planes. I noticed talking to veterans from different eras. For my stepfather, it was Pearl Harbor. He joined in that time, and then for other people, it was the Cold War or whatever. But for me, it was also 9/11. And when I told my mom that I was going to try to go to OCS and go into the Marine Corps, she about fainted and turned pale, even though she was supportive of me. So anyway, so go for it, man. Sorry.
I'm sure that's common. I think probably any mom is probably somewhat like that.
Yep.
So anyways, that's kind of what caused me to want to join the military. 9/11, and again, I think that's a common story for the post 9/11 veterans is having that experience, living through that, seeing our country get a black eye like that, and want to go kick some ass and take some names, or whatever the saying is.
Oh, as shit pissed me off too, man. So yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So and then another question: is there a reason you chose the reserves National Guard at first, as opposed to going into regular full time, or what was the decision making behind that?
Yeah, another good question, and that's fair too. I knew at the time that the National Guard was being deployed, actively overseas. So I knew I would probably get a chance to go overseas at some point. But I also had just finished college, and I had just started a job. I was like a year or so into this job, and I felt like, my parents helped me out a lot going to college. And I had been working at this job, and I felt like it would be letting a lot of people down if I just dropped all that, and I just went into the Army.
Right.
Not to say that being in the Army is a letdown to anybody.
No, I understand exactly what you mean.
My parents wouldn't have seen it that way, and I don't think my employer would have seen it that way either. But I had just started working with them, and if I just turn around and say, well, I'm out of here, I'm going to go, join the Army, that would be kind of a letdown to them. And then, my parents, who had just, helped me financially to get through college, spent all this money on college. And then I'm going to go do a job that I don't need this degree for, or whatever,
Right.
That also seemed like it might have been a letdown. So I decided to try to do the best of both worlds. Go in the National Guard. I get the same equipment, same kind of training, same, the only experience that's different is I am not living away from home at some Army base somewhere.
Right.
I get to stay at home, and I could train on the weekends, with the unit and everything. So that's kind of the gist of why I chose the Guard over active duty or whatever.
Okay, cool.
So,
and then in terms of, you got a good story about vertigo and kind of overcoming that once you get to basics. So then, where did you? Before we get there, I'm gonna let you go right into it. But where did you do your once you just did your basic boot camp? How long was that? Was it different from active duty, that type of thing?
No. So the boot camp for National Guard and Reserves is identical to the basic training for active duty.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the unit that I was in at basic training consisted of active duty soldiers, reservists, and National Guard soldiers who were all together in the same unit. So we went through the same training, learned how to fire the same weapons, did the same we had the identical experience. We had the same uniforms, everything. Like, I mean, National Guard has the same uniforms anyways as the Army, but like everything was identical. So
I'm asking a dumb, obvious question. I mean, I kind of know that, but I was just want to make sure what your experience was and if anything different. And I like you wrote before the show. You said I achieved flight that day as I scrambled back up the tower. It made me chuckle a little bit. So why don't you go into that one real quick, man?
Yeah. Yeah, so a little background is I have a terrible fear of heights. It's awful, and I don't know a time that I didn't have this. I don't know where it comes from. I just have always been afraid of heights. Even stepping up on a ladder to change the battery in your smoke alarm or whatever, or change a light bulb or something it gets me shaking in my knees.
Right.
So in basic training, when we were doing the rappelling training, I was on top of this tower. It's like about a 3-story tower, and I had to rappel off of this thing. And they taught us how to do it. They taught us how to have all the ropes and everything like that. So we knew it was safe. We tested out all this stuff before. I even had somebody up on top of the tower who double checked everything before I stepped over the tower. So as long as you're doing everything the right way, you're safe, right?
Yep.
But I'm still on top of this tower, and my knees were shaking. They're going in overdrive. They'd probably like set off a Richter scale if they had a thing nearby. And it was so obvious to the drill sergeant that was on top of the tower, how scared I was. And so as soon as I stepped both of my feet over the edge of this tower, the drill sergeant that was up there, he was like, "Holy shit, give me your hand. You're not clipped in right." Or, whatever. I forget exactly what he said, but that's what you were talking about.
That's
I achieved
scary,
flight
man.
that day. I jumped up and I grabbed on top of the tower and I pulled myself back up. And it took him a while to stop laughing at my reaction, because it was, I was probably totally pale and like shaking and everything. But then to make matters worse, I have to step back over the edge and
Right.
actually rappel down the tower. So
Right.
that was probably the hardest thing for me in basic training was the heights, climbing ropes and everything like that. Just being up off the ground, it just is not cool for me. So,
Well, yeah, you definitely Air Force wasn't for you then, for sure, right?
no, exactly. No, I wasn't. I don't think I'm going to be a pilot or a door gunner on a plane or anything like that.
Right. Right. So did you ever did you ever conquer that vertigo, or is it still with you?
No, I still have it. I don't know what it is about it, but I still have it, and it's pretty bad. It's actually kind of comical. My kids sometimes, like, that's the only way they can scare me is if I'm up high. Like they try scaring me all the time and they just can't do it. But yeah, they get me up on a ladder.
Heights. Yeah,
They get me up on a ladder and they just tap it, and I freak out. Anyway, so basic training. Like I said, it wasn't really all that difficult outside of that. I mean, I actually kind of enjoyed it. There were times when we'd be sitting there shooting machine guns and stuff. I'm like, they're actually paying me to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like any other time, I'd go out and I'd pay for it. I'd go to a range and pay to shoot these things.
That's what I was just about to say, man.
So much fun.
Me and my buddies pay to go shoot at the range like that, man. So yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, sorry. Now, where did you do your basic?
Oh yeah, it was at Fort Benning in Georgia.
Oh, you were in Fort Benning too. Okay, cool.
Yeah, because that's where the infantry, Army infantry, goes to train.
Gotcha.
The soldiers before they become infantrymen, I guess.
Now, you didn't get that in the middle of summer, did you?
Well, I started in March, like early March, I'd say, and went through the end of June. So it wasn't like the middle of summer, but towards the end it got pretty hot. And we had the weather extremes there too, where we actually had a tornado one day when we were there, and it was like right outside of our barracks. It just like kind of touched down right outside as we're walking back from dinner one night. And people have asked like, "Well, what does it sound? What does a tornado sound like?" And my response is always, "Get your ass moving!"
I was gonna say, yeah,
because it was the drill sergeants like just screaming at you, like, "Get your ass moving, get inside!"
He was your weather forecaster.
Yeah, exactly. So and then we'd be out in the field sometimes, and there'd be a thunderstorm, and we're just standing there like no shelter nearby or anything, so we'd have to just kind of hunker down and wait for it to pass over. Hopefully it doesn't kill us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the South is interesting that way for sure.
It is.
So once you finished basic, you were back in Connecticut doing your day job, and then 1 weekend a month, 2 weekends a year, 2 weeks a year type thing.
Yep, exactly. That's how it goes. You work a civilian job and you go in 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. And, a lot of times people rag on the National Guard and the reserves because they don't train as much as active duty.
Right.
But one of the things that I found to be invaluable was the wide range of experiences that the National Guard soldiers have in terms of their civilian job.
Yep.
Where you might, in an active duty unit, and this is not knocking on active duty or, puffing my chest out as a National Guard soldier or anything like that. But, in an active duty unit, you might have, an 18-year-old kid who graduates high school, goes to basic training, goes to his unit, learns whatever job, let's say an infantryman, just because that's what I know. And he goes into his unit, and the training that he does is more infantry-related tactics and training and things like that. And that becomes pretty much all he knows at that point. Whereas with the National Guard, we had mechanics. I had an accounting degree, so I was able to help out a lot with the soldiers with financial questions and things like that. But like things like mechanics and EMTs and things like that were all in our unit, and so they were able to bring their civilian experience into the Army. And when we were deployed, one of the guys who I mentioned was a mechanic also worked on ambulances that use the same kind of engine that the MRAPs that we had in Afghanistan that they use. So if there was ever an issue while we were out, we had a mechanic with us who could actually figure it out and diagnose what the issue was, versus a bunch of people who have never looked at an engine before, like me, and couldn't figure that type of stuff out. So, so I think, a lot of times people will knock on the National Guard because they're not as well trained or whatever, and which also is not true. But we also have a wide range of experiences that can help out where you may not necessarily expect it, but that's kind of the best type of thing to have is just something in your back pocket that can help out.
Yeah, and I one of my previous guests, and it escapes, I can't remember who, but he mentioned that. He said, he was active duty, but he mentioned that he came across a problem over in Afghanistan, and one of the National Guard's guys in his civilian life was in trains or something like that, and knew something about a deep depot that they came across because of his civilian work. And I think, when you take a bird's eye view of the whole thing, or a macro level, it's just about getting the job done, and as many experiences as you can bring to that job is, at the end of the day, is the important thing. Whether you get it from a civilian who trains on the weekend and then gets deployed, or you have an active duty, and I think if you're properly looking at it, you want to take that range. I mean, I think I went to junior college and for 2 years and then transferred, and I have to say I learned a lot from fellow students in junior college because they were going to night school and working day jobs, as opposed to when I got to a 4-year college, a lot of those people were guys that, kids that went there. Nothing wrong with either side. I just use the analogy to say that, you can get valuable contributions and experiences from all walks of life if you're open to looking for that. And it seems to me that the National Guard would probably allow for the Army to have some of that intake from the civilian world,
Yeah, for sure. And I think that really applies to any job, really. If you have a job and you have some outside experiences, you might be able to bring a different perspective and maybe do things better, or change the way you do things to make it more efficient, or whatever the case may be. But I think it's just in general a good idea to have a wide range of experiences, and I think that's why a lot of times colleges will have you take the courses that are outside of your major, like liberal arts courses for a business major, for example.
Right.
To give you a more well-rounded experience to help you, just overall be a better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. So then, how long did this go on before? Now, you eventually were. What was your kind of job path or promotion path, or as you're doing? How long before you eventually got deployed to Afghanistan? What was the path after that?
Yeah, so the general path, for me, so I had a college degree, and going into the National Guard, which the way the National Guard does promotions is a little bit different than active duty. They have what's called like promotion points, and I don't know if it's any different now because it's been a while since I've been out, but a college degree counts for enough promotion points that you start off as an E4, a specialist in the Army. So outside of basic training, I never really was a private, even though I was brand new to the military. I technically was an E4 specialist in the Army, and then a couple years later, I got promoted to sergeant, and then so I got out of basic training in 2006. And 2009, we were deployed to Afghanistan, or started our train up for the deployment. But we were basically put on active duty orders late 2009, like October, November timeframe. And so as far as like promotions go and all that kind of stuff, I didn't really deal with that too much because I only got promoted once while I was in the Army, even though that put me at sergeant. Which was maybe a little bit unique for some people. That's probably not the typical path that everyone goes. Right. But we just did the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year throughout that whole time period, and did trainings. Some of the trainings would take us to different places. We would go to New Jersey and New York for different trainings at different bases like West Point and Fort Dix and stuff like that. So so we got different experiences by going to different places. So it wasn't always just, driving around our state and terrorizing our our cities and stuff like that with, walking down the street with an M4 or whatever.
Exercises. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you were at, and then so in the ramp up to 2009, you were in Indiana. Is that right?
Yeah. So we went to Indiana for some of the train up and pre-mobilization stuff that we had to do. There's a lot of paperwork and stuff. If you've ever been in the military, there's paperwork.
Paperwork is king.
Everything. Yeah, exactly. So we had to do a lot of that stuff, and then also, we did more training, and it was a pretty higher intensity training where we were training pretty much every day and doing different ranges and courses and stuff like that to get us up to speed. Some of it was language courses and culture type courses, so we would know what to expect when we got to this foreign country that none of us had ever been to. Right. And well, most of us had never been to. There's some probably who had been there, but it was a pretty good training that we had there, and then. Shortly after we got to Indiana, my wife was pregnant at the time, and she went into labor, and so they sent me back home to go be with her for the delivery, which was cool. The downside to it though was when I left the base in Indiana, they had to kind of bend some rules to allow me to leave when I did, but the flight that I got booked was about 45 minutes. Was going to leave in about 45 minutes from the time that we booked it. Oh, geez. And the airport was about a half hour away from where we were. So I had to haul ass to get to the airport. And once when I got there, I didn't even think of, do I have any metal on me or whatever, going through the security type thing. So I'm like ripping everything off of me, throwing it in the bucket so I can go through the metal detector thing. And then I'm running as I'm trying to put all this stuff back on me. And I'm like knocking over kids in the airport. And I don't care. I see the gate. I'm getting there. That's all I care about right now. And so it was a bit of a stressful situation to see.
Man, that's
am I actually going to make it? It was really, really close. It was like one of those things where they were holding the door open and they're like, all right, let's go. Come on, get on. Yep. And then everyone kind of gives you dirty looks.
And then everyone stares at you as you walk to your seat, right?
Yeah.
Right,
so,
right. But you made it.
I did make it. Yeah. Eventually I did make it there. And when I got back home to Connecticut, it was about an hour or so before my son was actually born. So I got to the hospital and then like an hour later he was born. So It really couldn't have been any better timing.
Good timing
for
man.
that. So,
Good timing.
So that was great.
And then after that, then you were deployed shortly after.
Yeah, we ended. So I went back to Indiana for a few weeks to finish up the training there, and then we drove down to Fort Polk in Louisiana to do some more training. They call it JRTC training down there, and from there we left Louisiana. We didn't come back home or anything like that. We left Louisiana and headed to Afghanistan. The strange thing for me, and I don't know about anyone else's experience, but the strange thing for me is when we got on the airplane in Louisiana, we had no idea where we were going to land. Like most of the people who were getting on that plane had no idea where the plane was going to land. Mm-hmm. We didn't know, are we going straight to Afghanistan, which was highly unlikely because that would be a really long flight.
That's a haul, yeah.
Or are we landing in Ireland or Germany or Spain or some other place to refuel or whatever? We had no idea. We ended up landing in Germany, which was kind of cool because it was also Super Bowl Sunday. Oh. And we got to watch the Super Bowl in the airport in Germany. Yeah, exactly. Because they had to refuel and the pilots needed to, get some rest or food or whatever it is that they needed to do.
The pilots conveniently needed to refuel right when the Super Bowl happened, so probably they got to watch too. Yeah, right.
Exactly, yeah. So we got to watch that, and then from there we headed to Kyrgyzstan, and we stayed over there for a few days, and after that we flew into Afghanistan, and we landed in there at Bagram Airfield. Mm-hmm. And then we did a couple short flights to get to the base that we ended up staying at, which was right on the Pakistan border in eastern Afghanistan, area called Torkham, which is if anyone is familiar with Afghanistan, the Jalalabad, it's like south and east of Jalalabad. Mm-hmm. So that's where it is, and we're right on the border. And yeah, so my my time over there in Afghanistan, a lot of that was spent there on the border. We were in charge of securing the border crossing where about 80% of the NATO supplies come through. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think that a lot of the supplies get flown in, but they actually get put on boats, and the nearest port is in Pakistan. And so the cargo containers get taken off those boats, get put on trucks, and they are driven up in Pakistan through the border the border crossing that we were securing in Afghanistan. So we were basically just making sure that the stuff had the opportunity to cross the border and get into the country. So that was kind of our job, and then also checking the supplies and checking to make sure that things that were not supposed to be getting in were not getting in, bombs and things like that. So.
Absolutely. Where are you now? Are you way the hell up in the mountains? Are you what kind of elevation? What's the area like that you're mainly in there?
Yeah, the elevation was I forget exactly how many feet in terms of like where we were, like above sea level and things like that, but it was relatively low, but there were lots of mountains around us. Right. And so that actually kind of gave you the pucker factor.
No doubt. Especially if you read the history of that region, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Those mountains could be trouble. But so fortunately our base was situated kind of at the base of a mountain, a shorter mountain. And we had observation posts at the top of the mountain. So we basically controlled that mountain and then like everything below. So if anyone was to try to approach from the backside of the mountain to climb up and start attacking us from the top of the mountain, we had people up there who would see that before
sound the alarm.
Before it even was an issue. And it was an issue a couple times where people would try to attack the base. But we had it pretty well locked down that it was not going anywhere. So,
and then it's hard to explain. I haven't been to Afghanistan, but I've been to northern India a few times, up near Srinagar and Kashmir, kind of on the Pakistan border that side, and it's just hard to explain to people here that I'm sure you've probably found that as well, to try to convey just how different, that region of the world is to what you and I are used to. And do you have anything that sticks out to you? If not, it's cool. I'm just always curious to people that have gone over there and spent some time there. Is there any little tiny cultural things that stick out to you, or anything that sticks in your mind?
Well, they're not necessarily tiny cultural things. They're kind of big, but just seeing how the people live is really an eye opener. It's that a lot of the people live, especially around the area where I was, they live in mud huts. They pack mud and they make bricks out of the mud and they stack them up and they make their houses out of that. The indoor plumbing and things like that we take for granted here in America is, not even something that they probably even have heard of in some places over there. I kind of describe it to some people as kind of what you would think of like the biblical times,
right?
As like how people lived then. It's kind of the same, just add in cell phones, motorized vehicles, and AK-47s.
And AKs, I was going to say, because the Soviets' big contribution to the world. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much the same, though. Like, just seeing the way the people live and everything. It's just, there's still people who ride around on camels and, things like that. And it's... I don't know. It's kind of bizarre.
That's eye-opening for sure, and probably makes you at least in my time traveling a little bit, it certainly made me appreciate all the more what things that small and big things that we take for granted anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And even their cars. I mentioned motorized vehicles. Their cars. A lot of their cars come from the United States, where we actually found out that a lot of cars that get stolen in the United States are driven down to Mexico, and they're sold to somebody in Mexico, and then they get put on a boat and they get sent overseas. And these cars are identical to what they were when they were in the United States, including their license plates, the stuff that's in the glove box, and things like that. And we know this because I can't tell you how many California license plates we saw driving by
really
while we were in Afghanistan. And it wasn't just California. It was California, it was Texas, it was Alaska, and Kansas, and every
surreal.
So many states had these cars, these license plates, I should say, driving around. And so once when we started realizing that they were coming around quite often, we started stopping the cars and taking off all the license plates from these cars, and we were collecting them, like almost like souvenirs, but we were just taking them. And in one car, we searched through the glove box, and there was like receipts and stuff from whoever owned the car. And so we took those and
Burger King and Chipotle from Kansas.
Yeah,
or whatever.
It was like, they got their tires replaced or something like that.
Right.
And they just shoved the receipt in the glove box or whatever. And so I actually compiled a list of all the license plate numbers, and I found the California State Police, someone over there, and I sent them all of these license plate numbers. And I said, here's a whole bunch of cases you can close because those cars have been stolen. They're over here. We found them, but you're not going to get them back.
That's funny. In all my reading and talk, I've never heard that before, which is that's again fascinating. I never heard that before. That's really interesting, man.
It was pretty crazy. Yeah.
That's not something. Yeah, completely out of place to see a California or Alaska or whatever license plates rolling by you in the mountains of Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a trip, man. Okay. Well, yeah, you taught me something new, man. That's interesting. Local cops know where to know another place to look. Call the Army.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then in terms of this kind of gets us to at this time. Now, your brother is deployed with you at the same time.
Yeah. So like I said, he was in the Vermont Army National Guard and I was in the Connecticut Army National Guard, but we both fell under the 86th Brigade Combat Team, which encompassed the National Guard units from several states, including Vermont and Connecticut. And I believe at that time that was, and I don't know if this has changed, but I believe it was the largest deployment of National Guard soldiers since World War II.
Wow.
When we were over there. And so that was pretty interesting that we both were over there at the same time. We weren't in the same location. He was about 80, 90 miles or so away from me, which, if you know anything about the terrain in Afghanistan, that could take you days to cover that much terrain.
Sounds like driving in LA, man. 20 miles away, it'd take you about 5 hours. Jeez.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Right. So you might as well have been in another country at that point.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, it's felt like we were. The amount of communication that we had with each other was next to nothing. The last time I spoke to him before getting into Afghanistan was actually the last time that I spoke with him. And the reason why is because he was killed in action in Afghanistan. So. But the last time I spoke to him was in Indiana before I left there, the last day that I spent there. And then, we had sent emails back and forth or, Facebook message type things back and forth every once in a while, but it wasn't very reliable that we'd be able to get on the internet. So we didn't send very much. I think maybe 2 or 3 times the whole time we were there that we actually communicated with each other. The majority of the communication that we had with each other was through my parents, where I would get a chance to call home, and so I'd call them, I'd tell them what was happening, and then when my brother called home, he would find out from my parents and vice versa, that type of thing. So
gotcha. And speaking of that, and again, this is years ago, but I will say I'm sorry for that, man. Like, that's all I can say. That's awful and the worst. But I appreciate you being willing to talk about it. And for sure. Speaking on that, you mentioned the date August 22nd, 2010. You were kind of in a remote village that you had helicoptered into on a mission. Do you want to kind of take it from there a little bit and kind of tell the story and get into that?
Yeah. So. I said, for the most part, we were working on this border area to, secure the border, but we also had other missions that we would go off to other parts of the country and do, various missions, whatever came up, we would go and do those missions. And so we were on like a 2-week, hiatus from the border work that we were doing, and we were off doing these other missions. We were going into different villages, and largely we were getting flown in on helicopters, and we were landing on a mountain outside of the village, and then we would walk down the mountain into the village and do whatever we had to do. And so on August 22nd of 2010, it was kind of rinse and repeat. We did the same type of thing. We got on the helicopters real early in the morning, like 2:00 in the morning, something like that. And we flew out under the cover of darkness. So I was the first person to get off the helicopter on our particular helicopter. And when you're on a helicopter, you can't really hear anything. They're super loud.
Right.
And so the door gunner on the back of the helicopter, he kind of motioned to me like, all right, it's good to go. Like it's your turn to go. And when it's pitch black out, you're basically just relying on your night vision goggles to see anything. And they work fine in terms of being able to see stuff, but anyone who's ever worn them knows that they have not so great with depth perception.
Oh,
so
right. Okay.
It's not the best for that type of stuff. So I didn't realize that the helicopter hadn't totally landed yet when he told me to get off the helicopter. We were still a few feet up off the ground at that point. And so I stepped off, expecting for my foot to hit solid ground. And I'm wearing, full body armor, helmet, weapon, ammo. Got about 100 pounds on my back in my rucksack with more ammo and water and everything else that we needed. And I just totally screwed up my knee on that. I just came down wrong on it. The ground it's not like you're landing on solid, even ground. You're landing on rocky, rough terrain.
Of course.
And it totally messed up my knee when I stepped off there. But I also had about 50 guys behind me who were about to walk into the same situation, although the helicopter had come down. It was in the process of landing. It was just like a couple feet off the ground at that point, so no one else really had that problem but me. And so I got myself up and I got out of the way so I wasn't getting trampled on by everyone else coming off the helicopter.
Stampede, yeah.
And then, we waited till daylight to go down into the village. And this particular mission, we were working with the Afghan army, and they were supposed to take the lead on this mission, where they would go and they would search the houses for, at the time we were looking for Taliban that had stolen some Afghan army uniforms and weapons and things like that. So we were like, okay, you guys go ahead, and we're here for support if you guys need backup type of thing. So it really wasn't that intense for us. It was probably more intense for the Afghan army guys. And they found some things, some uniforms and weapons and things like that, and we destroyed those on the spot. And we did our thing, walked around the village, and tried to see if we could observe anything that was out of the ordinary or whatever. And then towards the tail end of this mission, I ended up getting a call on the radio saying that the commander was looking for me. And if you know anything about military protocols and things like that, the commander of a unit typically doesn't go directly to the sergeant, the E5 or whatever. Like, there's a chain of command that they would probably go through, right, to relay a message or whatever. But that's not what was happening here. So immediately I was thinking something either really, really good happened or something really, really bad happened.
Right.
And that's the only two explanations I could think of.
Right.
And so I started thinking all right, I didn't do anything exceptionally well. Like, I did my job, but I didn't go above and beyond. I didn't, jump on a grenade or anything crazy like that. You know what I mean? Right. So I started thinking, well, okay, maybe one of my guys lost some of their equipment. So I started checking all my guys' equipment, and I was checking serial numbers and making sure everyone had everything. And I was just freaking out. Right. So eventually I caught up with the commander, and he goes, come on over here, take a knee, take your helmet off and everything. And which struck me as really odd, because when you're out on a mission, you never take your helmet off.
Right.
Like, that is just not something you do. He's like, yeah, come on over here, take a knee. And so he told me that my brother was out on a mission, and his unit got ambushed, and that he had gotten hit. And so immediately I start thinking to myself, like, all right, what does he need? Like, does he need like a blood transfusion or something like that? Like, get me on a helicopter. I'll go and help him. Whatever I have, he can have. Take it from me. That's fine. Being the big brother, I was always in that kind of protective mode, and that was the first thing that crossed my mind. But
no question.
The commander stopped me, and he was like, "No, you're not hearing me. Like, he was killed. There's no saving him at this point." And so like anyone else, I broke down. I was crying. I had those natural reactions. But those natural reactions, that grieving process that normally takes place with most people, was short-lived for me, because about 20, 30 minutes or so after finding out that my brother was killed, we started getting attacked. Our unit started getting attacked by the people that the Afghan army missed in the village, and all the weapons that they missed. And so we started getting attacked by small arms fire, AK-47s and RPGs and things like that. So I had to immediately just put all the sadness aside. I had to put all that stuff aside, because I had my squad of guys that I had to go take care of to make sure that they were positioned correctly, that they had enough ammo, that they had all the stuff that they needed to repel this attack. And so that 20 or 30 minutes was about all the grieving time that I got, because I immediately switched into soldier mode, trying to protect my guys and make sure that they had what they needed, and we didn't end up sending any more bodies home that day.
That's right. That's right.
And especially, in a selfish way for myself, like, I didn't want my parents to get a second knock on the door,
Absolutely.
finding out that I was killed too, or something. So,
yeah, that's almost literally one of my favorite old Johnny Cash songs is the name of your podcast, man, The Drive On, and he explains that. I'm not sure if that's where you got it, but it put me in mind of that. So you literally lived that. You had to put that,
for sure,
put that down and drive on, man, and that's that's a testament to your training and your character at the end of the day. So that's because you got a lot of other parents back home that are relying on you as well to keep their children safe as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that to me would have been the worst thing in the world, is if any of my guys were to get killed because my head wasn't in the game and I wasn't focused on what I needed to do, to do my job and make sure that they were safe.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have been able to forgive myself for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, did you learn the particulars of how your brother was killed? Was it just did you get into that later, or what was the process of that, and then kind of telling your parents and that type of thing?
Well, interestingly enough, I kind of found out about this event happening before my commander even called me. I found out because when we were on this mission down in the village, a U.S. general, flew in and landed at the bottom of the village. There's a clearing that he was able to land in, and he was standing there, and on his radio, he got notification that 2 soldiers were killed from the unit. Didn't say what unit was from or anything like that. Didn't say how they were killed or whatever. But I was standing right next to him at the time, and so I heard this coming in over the radio, and I was like, "Well, that sucks." I feel bad for whoever's that was and their family and things like that. But come to find out, that call was calling about my brother.
Oh, wow.
And so I technically found out about it then, but I didn't really know about it at that point.
Of course.
But once when the commander told me, he didn't really know the details of how he got killed. He said, one soldier they think was killed with in an RPG attack. Another soldier was shot. But he didn't know who was who, because there were 2 soldiers who were killed that day. And my commander was just telling me, I'm sure if he's anything like you, Scott, he said, I'm sure he took a few of those fuckers out too.
Yep.
To get that job done.
Yep.
Turned out that wasn't necessarily the case. He was the first one who was killed in that attack. He was shot and killed almost instantaneously. But the rest of the guys in his unit, they got some that day, and they took care of business for him.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, no, I just and then in terms of kind of were you able to break the news to your parents, or did that come from somebody else, or?
Yeah, so when a death like this occurs, we basically have to go radio silent. Like I was not allowed to call home for a couple days.
Okay.
That day for sure I wasn't able to call home. The next day I wasn't able to call home until much later in the day, basically because we had to get confirmation that my parents received notification and that they knew about it, because the last thing they wanted to do is have me be the one to break the news from whatever, the other side of the world,
Right.
that wouldn't be really good. They wanted to make sure that somebody was there with them. And so my parents received notification. There was a Army chaplain and another soldier who came to the door. And since my parents hadn't heard from me in several days because I was out on missions, they immediately thought it was me that was killed. And so they, of course, having a newborn son at home, they started thinking of all that type of stuff. But then the chaplain told them, no, it was your other son, Stephen. And so that was a problem. But for me, I was taken off that mountain where we got attacked, where that mission was. I was taken off and I was flown to Bagram Airfield, basically to get me out of there as soon as possible so I could be home for the funeral, be with my family and things like that. But as soon as I left that mountain, I was basically alone. I wasn't alone, like there were other people, but nobody that I really knew. Mm-hmm. They were just other soldiers. And so it was a very lonely feeling. And then add on not being able to call home, not being able to really talk to anybody. I mean, there was a chaplain there who chatted with me and stayed with me to make sure I was okay, make sure I wasn't going to hurt myself or anything like that. They actually took all my weapons away too, because they weren't sure, like, is this guy going to snap or, whatever. I wasn't suicidal or anything like that. So,
but no, you understand the precaution. I mean,
I totally understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
and they were right to do that. I think that was the proper precautions to take in that time. They actually had somebody stay with me, like bunk with me, to basically make sure I didn't go off and do something stupid like that.
Right.
But yeah, so I ended up flying out the next day on the same flight that my brother and the other soldier's name, I keep saying other soldier, I feel bad. His name is Tristan Southworth.
Okay.
And the two of them were on the same flight as me, leaving Afghanistan to go to Kuwait. And I was able to attend, they call it a ramp ceremony, where they bring the bodies of the deceased onto the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to be there, and it felt kind of like a wake, like if you've ever been to a wake before a funeral. A lot of military officials, civilians, military, like contractors and things like that. People from other countries. There's some Polish soldiers and German soldiers who came through, and they all paid their respects to my brother and the other soldier Tristan, and it was very comforting knowing that there was so much support there from people, not just Americans, but from all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, we flew to Kuwait, and then I left my brother in Kuwait, and I flew home to Atlanta. I went to Germany and then Atlanta. And if anyone who's ever come home through Atlanta, or just been in the Atlanta airport, you've probably seen a bunch of people who are there to support the military. They're probably carrying American flags, wearing patriotic shirts and all that kind of stuff. Kind of like I did when I was at the Air Force Base when those soldiers came home after Desert Storm.
Right.
And I knew that they were going to be there, and I just wanted to duck and hide. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anyone. I just wanted to. I knew their heart was in the right place, but I just wanted to be left alone. I got to the point where I almost went into a store and just bought some civilian clothes to ditch my uniform and change into that. I didn't go quite that far, but I just kind of skirted around where they were. And all these years later, I feel bad because I know what they're doing, and their heart's in the right place. It was just I was not in the right place myself.
No question. That's it's one of those situations where there's no wrong there. It's just both. You were going through what you were going through, and they're trying to help. But everybody understands. It's just unless you've been in that situation, you don't know. You just don't know. How you feel.
Yeah, for sure.
And the last thing you want to do is feel like you have to generate or perform or anything, not perform, but just to generate anything, you're probably so sucked emotionally that it's, it was probably tough.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, yeah. So I just kind of made my way to my gate, got on my plane, and, just kind of kept to myself on the last leg home. When I finally got home, I was greeted at the gate by my parents, my wife, my son, and my aunt and uncle. They were right at the gate, and also a state police officer. And the state police officer said, "You're probably going to want to go out a different, not the typical public exit of the airport." He said, because there are news vans lined up and down the street here that trying to get an interview out of you here at the airport. And so he led us out, kind of a back way to, away from where the news vans were and everything.
That's cool, man, to be honest. Not cool, that's a wrong word to use for a situation, but that's thoughtful of him, man. Shit.
Yeah, exactly. It was cool of him to have that. He could have just said, well, that sucks for you. You're on your own kind of thing.
Right.
But, he took the time to lead us out the right way. And, to this day, I still don't know how the news even knew that I was coming home that day.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that even get there?
I have no idea. It was bizarre to me that they would have found that out, because I was even kind of a little hush hush with my parents and my wife and everything. I didn't tell them until I knew I was in Atlanta, and I was like, yeah, I'll be home in 3 hours or something like that.
And the last thing you want to see is a bunch of cameras, and I mean that
exactly.
I'm tempted to drop some unchristian-like language about the media at this point, because that's vulture shit, man, to be honest.
Well,
I understand they got a job to do and it's a story, but that's just, not the time or place, man.
Exactly. And so we ended up pulling up to my parents' house. My parents drove me home to their house, where a lot of family was kind of gathered there anyways. And lined up and down their street were news vans for all the television, the radio stations, the newspapers and things like that. They were all kind of lined up there waiting to get some story, right? And I was fuming. I was so angry. I was like, screw these people. I don't want to talk to these people. They can go do whatever they're going to do, but don't involve me with it. Yeah. Like, just leave me alone about it. But then, when you have a death in the military, your family gets assigned a casualty assistance officer. And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, do what you want to do, but they're going to run a story anyways. And they may go get an interview from the guy at the grocery store who's in his car and just say, what do you think about this soldier who was killed? And of course he's going to say, oh, it's terrible. It's a tragedy, right. Yada, yada. Or they may get a soundbite from someone who went to second grade with him or something like that. But it's not going to be anyone who like really has any intimate knowledge of my brother. Mm-hmm. And so he said, if they're going to tell a story, it might as well be the right story. Mm-hmm. And it might as well be his story. And who knows him better than his family? Right. And so that kind of turned things around for me. I was like, you know what? All right, let's go and let's do this. I'm not totally happy about it because I just had a aversion to working with the press. Yeah. But we did. My dad and I we went out and we talked to them. My mom was there, but she really didn't want to talk to anybody. My wife also was there, but it was mostly my dad and I who were talking to the media. And over the next few days, we continued to do that, and my mindset sort of changed as I started talking about it. And like I'm doing now, I will sing his story to anyone who will listen. Yeah. I'll tell anybody who he was, what he was like, and I'll do that all day.
And your brother's name was Stephen, is that right?
Yes, Stephen. Yeah, his name was Stephen. Yep.
Did he have any family, or was he married, or?
He was engaged, so he had a fiance, and he had been dating her for a while, and they got engaged shortly before he left for Afghanistan, and they were supposed to get married the following fall. So it would have been like about a year later they were supposed to get married. So.
Wow. And did you kind of? I guess that leads us to your own podcast, the Drive On podcast. You did that, and I think that was my visceral reaction, even hearing your stories, to be pissed off, to be honest, dude. And I'm, you and I don't really know each other, but I just was like,
sure.
I can, I have a brother who's, who's my older brother and who is the close, probably my closest friend in the world, man. And looked out for me my whole life. And I can't imagine, I just don't even like to contemplate if something happened to him, man. And so I can't imagine the last thing I'd want to do is talk to some press. But I guess, that officer, that casualty officer, was that kind of his comments there about you kind of taking control and talking about your brother? Is that kind of where you marked the time where you said, hey, maybe it's a good thing to talk about this, which eventually led to you doing your own podcast, or what?
Yeah, it was just a way for me to tell his story at the time. It really wasn't anything more than that. It was just making sure that people knew who he was, and he wasn't just some, robotic soldier that you might think of from movies, and just not a real person.
Yeah, fleshed out human being, and yeah.
I wanted to put the human emotions to it. And so talking about, the podcast, I think opening up and telling your story is pretty important. And, you may not necessarily have to do it on television or in the newspaper, or on the radio or anything like that, right. like we did. You don't even have to start a podcast.
Yeah.
But just telling your story can help other people who might be going through the same thing,
right?
To learn a little bit about what it is that you did to overcome some of the struggles that you're going through, or whatever the case may be. And I started my podcast about a year ago now, and a little over a year now, and I was just getting so pissed off at the alarming number of veteran suicides that were taking place every day in our country.
Right.
The number is somewhere around 22 a day,
right.
they say. And it's like, that doesn't happen in other areas of our society, in other things that are
professions
are happening, other professions or whatever. Like that just doesn't happen. Right. And I was like, well, why is this happening? Well, part of it is that we're not opening up the conversation. We're not having the difficult conversations about what people are going through, struggling with emotionally, and more importantly, what people are doing to fix that, to get them out of that dark place, or to get out of a homelessness situation, or to, put the bottle down and stop drinking, or the drugs, or whatever. And if we start having these conversations, it opens it up and gives a possibility to some people who might be struggling with this stuff, who might think that they're a lost cause or hopeless or whatever, and it might give them that opportunity to say, hey, you know what, there might be a light at the end of this tunnel, there might be a better, more positive future out there for me. Maybe I'll try one of these things, that I heard about on this show.
Right. That's
and
awesome.
even if it's not the veteran themselves who are listening, maybe it's a family member who knows that their loved one is struggling with something, addiction or PTSD or something, whatever. And maybe they can suggest some of these things. I don't really care who listens. I just want to put a resource out there that will help people.
Yeah, it was not in the same way, because I didn't serve, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this show was just, I don't care if it's one or two people, was just to give to kind of flesh out people who do your job, and to remind everybody that there's, you guys aren't, soldiers are not automatons. They're part of our society. They come out of our society, and they're full flesh and blood human beings, and they have stories. And if only one person listens to your show and maybe decides to get help, or decides to help a loved one, that's all worth it, man. Like the way I look at it, man. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't matter if it's 1 or 10. Doesn't matter, man.
Exactly.
And that's the best way to remember your brother, probably.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I figure he's not here to continue the fight and help out the way I know he would. And so, I'm picking that up, and I'm going to do it for as long as I can. As long as people want to keep listening, I'll keep doing it. And if people have stories to tell, I'm more than willing to have them on the show and share their stories, because I think it's really important to do that type of thing.
And so to take it, and I want to go just head back now. After that, after you'd gone home, I asked you one of the pre-show questions. I asked you about how did your views change, and did that event you mentioned that event kind of just sucked it out of you in a certain way, as understandably so. And what were how did your views change after that, and what was your kind of process of getting out of the service at that point?
Yeah, so I had mentioned that knee injury that I had on that last mission. I kind of muscled my way through it and dealt with it that day. But it got pretty bad after I got home, and so I ended up getting surgery on it. And I was nearing the end of my enlistment. I was about 6 to 9 months or so out from the end of my enlistment, and the recovery time on the surgery that I had would put me right at the end of my enlistment.
Okay.
And so I was thinking to myself, like, I'm going to go into my training, the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year kind of training, and I'm going to be useless. I'm just going to be sitting there doing nothing while everyone else is out in the field doing training and everything else like they normally would do. And it was kind of depressing to me that, I didn't really have a purpose there anymore, but I still was kind of expected to be there. Mm-hmm. And so, I looked into, like what would I need to do to get discharged early? And there's a thing that's called the Surviving Sons and Daughters that allows people who were in a situation like I was with a deceased family member, like a brother or sister or something like that, to get out of the military honorably, discharged and everything. So I figured, I was at the point where I was basically useless to my unit. I wasn't really there to do anything. I was just there because I had to be, to check a box that I showed up. And, I figured I'd open up a spot for a promotion for somebody else who could you take my spot and actually do the job.
Right.
And quite frankly, on top of that, just losing my brother, it really sucked the life out of me. In as far as my passion, my desire for the military, and I wasn't as good of a leader as I probably should have been anymore at that point. And so, I didn't think I really belonged there anymore. I wasn't doing anyone any favors. I wasn't making anyone better at that point. If anything, I was probably dragging the ship down. With my crappy attitude and things like that. And it was just time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got from there, and then after that, now some way, form or fashion, you made your way from the East Coast, and you made it. What brought you out to Arizona, and then kind of maybe talk about, you mentioned your own podcast, but talk about what made you finally decide to just go ahead and try that.
Yeah, sure. So my wife and I, we both grew up in Connecticut. We were born there, and we lived there for all of our lives. And we had a couple really, really bad winters. They were, like snow up to your hips, and like it was just terrible. And it was like week after week after week, and power outages and all this kind of stuff. And it was wearing on us. And we hated shoveling the snow and finding a place for it when the snowbanks are over your head and everything like that. And it just was getting to us. So, we toyed around with the idea of moving to someplace warmer. And we started looking, and, we had a couple criteria. One was it had to be, warmer than it was in Connecticut, and it also had to be a lower cost of living. And so we landed on Arizona, and we moved out
that ticks
here.
those boxes, man, for sure.
It does. For sure on the warmer
part,
side.
right?
Yeah, it's like 113 outside right now.
Yeah, Scott and I were just talking before the show, man. He says it's, would you say the forecast is heading north of 115 at some point here coming up, or what?
Yeah, come this weekend, it's looking like it'll be basically like the face of the sun.
Jesus, man. Yeah. So you decide you settled on that, and you're in Surprise, Arizona.
Yeah. That's the city we landed on, and we love it out here. It's really nice. It's a great area to raise a family. They got lots of stuff to do for kids and things like that. So we're really happy, especially having now we have 3 children, so we're really happy with the area. So,
and what kind of, and then talk about, did your experience with Stephen and going, was that just kind of nagging on you, and to go ahead and try to start the Drive On podcast? Like, what was the thinking going in behind that?
Yeah, and actually, what happened with my brother also sort of was one of the reasons that we moved out here. I was going around, just walking around town, going to places, and people would start to recognize me because my family and my face was on the news, the nightly news, the local news or whatever, on the cover of the Hartford Courant, the newspaper in Connecticut, and a few of the other newspapers, and people would just recognize us. And that was starting to wear on me. Not the fact that they recognized me, it's just what they recognized me for. And it was starting to really affect me. And so I kind of wanted to just get away from that and go to a place where nobody really knew you, and just kind of almost in a way start over
again. Yeah, absolutely.
And so we did that, and yeah, so I felt like, when I eventually started this podcast, that there were stories that needed to be told, and some of the voices, some of the people that I've had on the podcast were people who talked about other soldiers who were killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Some people would talk about other soldiers who were killed committed suicide after getting back home.
Right.
And so I'm using it sort of as a platform for people to tell their stories and share with other people, what they've gone through and what they've experienced.
Right.
And I think that's something that as a society we're kind of missing nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
We look at other people, and if they're not exactly like us or they don't think the same way that we are, they're evil and they're terrible and they're a racist or they're sexist or whatever other
hyper polarized, man. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
We're doing this in our society, and we're all people, and we all have emotions, and we all deal with things differently. And I think if we can humanize things a little bit, it might go a long way. And so I'm trying this out and seeing what kind of effect it might have on the country and on our veteran population anyways.
Amen to that, dude. And that's I've been same sort of thing. And I just, recently a couple months back started this, and it was the same thing. I was just so much polarization on social media and people that I know that we all grew up together and are turning on each other because of this. And so I said, my own little minuscule way, what can I do to try to add some positivity to the airwaves? And I thought maybe this was and then spending 20 years or so overseas and listening to conversations about what people said about our military as opposed to the people I knew and the people in my family that had served. And I said, no, if I can, like you with your podcast, if you can just reach one or two people and maybe help humanize that person. I'd rather not add kindling to that fire, you know what I mean, of rancor and all that other stuff, because I still,
for sure,
really believe in the country, and I really, having seen the alternative, and you have as well, I just figured, let me try to do something positive rather than that. So it sounds kind of similar to what you were feeling, except you have this powerful impetus. You're carrying your brother with you every time you do it as well,
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it becomes I don't want to say a burden, but it's a lot of work to do this. When I first started it, I had no idea how to do a podcast. Right. I asked a few friends who had a podcast, like, all right, what kind of microphone do you have? What do you do? And how do you record it and all that kind of stuff? I didn't even know how to edit the audio or anything at that point.
YouTube University, brother. Me too.
Exactly. Yeah. So I ended up figuring it out, and that's something that I take with me from my college days, is just figuring things out. I taught myself quite a bit of stuff over the years, and this is just another one of them that I sort of figured out. And maybe I'm not doing everything perfectly, exactly the best way with the best audio quality and everything else, but it gets the job done, and I'll learn along the way, and I can only get better. So
yeah, absolutely. Me too. Hey, I'm tracking right with you there too. I got a dinky mic and a laptop, and record in certain areas of the house or the apartment where I can get a piece of quiet. That's it.
For sure. Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you're writing a book about your experiences. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, sure. So the book I briefly mentioned earlier, how I got out of the military was called The Surviving Sons and Daughters. So the book is going to be called Surviving Son, and it's a story, a lot of what we talked about today, kind of how I got into the military, the background there, and my time overseas, a little more detail into what we did over there and everything like that. But it's partially a military history book where we go into that type of story. And I look back at the previous wars, Vietnam, Korea, World War II, World War I, all these wars. Any of the books that were written were either written by the veterans who served there or by someone who wasn't there and looked up this stuff, right. and they cobbled the information together. And so I figured, this generation should have their story told as well.
I agree.
So what better way than to write the book, from my perspective and my experience. But like I said, there was a lot of things that I went through, and not all of them were easy. I struggled with quite a bit of stuff over the years, and I ended up adding the second half of the book is going to be kind of self-help, where it talks about how to cope with some of the things that I went through, and how I found a better path and didn't let this stuff get me down all the time, because a lot of guys come back and they just let their experiences drag them down, down into a bottle or down into depression, PTSD, whatever the case may be, and they just can't seem to get over that hump.
Right.
And so I'm trying to do what I can, much like what I'm doing with the podcast. I'm trying to help people by sharing my own story and my own experiences through this book.
Awesome, man. Good for you, dude. Yeah, that's great, man. And I 100% agree with you, man. I was a history major. Did a lot of war stuff. I've read, every general's book there is, going back to World War I, and then a bunch of reading a World War II book by Victor Davis Hanson right now. So I eat that stuff up, but I really track with your idea about this generation needing to write its story, and especially by the the soldiers and people that were there. So that's awesome, man, and good for you. And whenever that gets when you get your publisher and you're ready to release again, would love to have you on again quickly to talk about it, man, if you're up for it.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. Still shopping around for a publisher now, and putting the finishing touches on the book at the moment. So we'll definitely have to get this back out there again when the book is published.
Yeah, anything I can do to help to spread the word, man, that's awesome.
I appreciate it.
Well, real quick before we kind of wrap up, man, one more time, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, listen to your podcast, whatever.
Yeah, the podcast, again, is called Drive On Podcast. You can go to driveonpodcast.com and find all the episodes on the website there, and all the subscription links to Apple Podcast and all the other places. Or you can just go straight to your favorite podcast player and search for Drive On Podcast there. You'll probably find it. On social media, we're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Drive On Podcast.
Awesome, man. Hey, well, Scott, man, thanks so much. It's great talking to you, man. I appreciate you spending the time, man. And I think you're doing great work, and hopefully this gets the word out a little bit more, and kind of help remember your brother and do some good for yourself and some other vets as well, man. So thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely, man. Talk soon.
All right, take care.